2024 marks the 150th anniversary of the Sagrenti War. What exactly was this war? And were there any benefits from it? Should we even bother to remember this date? With me is historian Yao Anokye Frimpong for answers to those questions. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, my brother Kafui.
Before we even get into the business of the war and what exactly does Sagrenti come from? What kind of word is that?
Sagrenti is the name, in fact, a corrupted form of the name Sir Garnet Wolseley. You know, our people substantially were illiterates, and to be able to mention or call the full name of the man who led the British Army against the Ashantis in 1874 would be a mouthful. So the corrupted version, Sagrenti, something like Sir Garnet. And we are told that at the time he was about the finest British soldier. There was a rebellion in India, and this man had been sent there to quell it. And he did it so expertly well that when the British Parliament felt it had to reduce, not just reduce, to completely annihilate Ashanti and bring it under its domain, it was the name Colonel Sir Garnet Wolseley that came up.
At that time, in the 19th century, towards the end of the 19th century, what was the state of affairs in the Gold Coast?
It was like this. You see, we had the Danes on the Gold Coast, we had the Dutch, and we had the English. In fact, the Portuguese had been driven away by the Dutch and all their possessions taken over by them. And then the Danes had sold their possessions, including the famous Christiansborg Castle, to the English. And then the Germans had also left the Gold Coast, having sold their possessions to the Dutch. So the major powers here then were the Dutch and the English. Then in the 1860s, there was a change of possessions between the Dutch and the English. And this would seriously affect the fortunes of Ashanti. You would recall that far back, about 250 years earlier, the Ashantis under Osei Tutu had defeated Denchira and Intimijakari. And it was the Denchiras who held the notes of the Elmina Castle. And so every year they had to pay heavy amount as to the landlords, to the Denchira people. And so when Ashanti defeated Denchira, all these years, they were taking lots of money from the Dutch. For that reason, the Ashanti and the Dutch had become very good friends. In fact, the English would not supply arms to the Ashantis because of the interest of the Fantis. Because of the interest of the Fantis, you know. So the only place where the English, the Ashanti would get arms and all the resources they needed from Europe would be from the Dutch people. So they had become friends. The Dutch would always arm them to be stronger and stronger in order to get more slaves for them to be shipped away. So this was the state of affairs until the change came.
So
and
this, I can just assume that this was at the height of the slave trade.
At the height of the slave trade. So when the change came about, the British, or maybe the English, had acquired the Elmina Castle. So once they had acquired the Elmina Castle, it means that there will be no money to be paid to Ashanti. Okay. Second, it meant that they would not easily sell goods to the Ashantis. And here I need to explain. The Ashantis avoided buying goods from the English at Cape Coast for two main reasons. The first one was that the Fantis, who neither imported goods from Europe nor captured slaves for sale or did anything at all, profited heavily from the British Ashanti trade. Why? The Ashantis would bring their gold, slaves, and cows and other resources from the interior and the north to Cape Coast. Now, the Fantis would not allow them to see the English, let alone trade with them. Just as the English, the Fantis would also obtain goods from the English and would sell to the Ashantis for big profit.
So the Fantis were like intermediaries or agents.
Always the middlemen,
in the middle.
and made a lot of money.
Okay.
And what pained them most was that the English would always remove customs duty from nations they classified allies or civilized. And Ashanti was not in their list of civilized nations. So Ashanti would have to pay heavy duty on the goods sold at Cape Coast. And then also, the prices would go up because, unlike the Dutch, the English felt that they were responsible for the administration of the areas immediately within the confines of the forts and castles they controlled, more or less like a colonial government. So the cost of administration was put on the goods sold. So it means Ashanti going to buy goods in Cape Coast would be about 3 times or more higher than the prices of goods at Elmina.
So they wanted to eliminate the Fanti connection.
They always wanted, that was why constantly there were wars between the two. So this was what happened there. And to make things worse, the Ashantis would wake up from their sleep one day only to hear that Elmina had changed hands. Now it is the English people controlling Elmina. So it means that the same cutthroat prices suffering at Cape Coast would be meted out to them here.
Thank you for setting the stage and giving us this background. So now, what occasioned the Sagrenti War? Was it initiated by the British, or was it an attack by the Ashanti?
I would say both. Both because I've already laid the foundation about the exchange of the forts and castles. And the Ashantis seriously protested. They protested that they did not want to see the English people at Elmina. And they were right to a very high extent because Elmina was part of Ashanti territory. Elmina was part of Ashanti territory.
Also,
because after the defeat of the Dangerous, when they defeated the Dangerous people in Team Jakara and started obtaining the notes and started trading with them, they made sure they had to protect the interests of Elmina at all times as a way of protecting the Ashanti traders along the coast and as a way of always securing arms and ammunition from Europe. Because anytime they lost that, they had to go down to Asini, to the Nzema area, which was a very long journey for them. So they made sure they had annexed Elmina. And the Dutch also respected that as a way of bringing peace between themselves and the Ashantis. And the people of Elmina were also competing with the Cape Coasters, because you will see that apart from the Far East Castle at Christianburg, Osu, the only 2 castles we had in Ghana, you know, the castles had the major forms of the fort, were the Elmina and the Cape Coast Castle. So the trade concentrated in these 3 areas, 2 southwest and 1 southeast. So it was very lucrative for the Dutch to respect Ashantis as trading partners and also to acknowledge Ashanti as owners of Elmina. So for you to trade Elmina, exchange it between the two of you without reference to the Asante was a big sacrilege.
It's like selling my property without my consent.
It's as simple as that. So Elmina was Ashanti. So more or less, as you rightly said, without the consent of Ashanti, how do you go and trade in Elmina?
So was there communication between the Asantini of that time and the British authorities over this, after this trade occurred, leading to the war?
There was communication. In fact, the British governor then, Halley, the Asantehene protested to him, and he was ready to accept and understand the Ashanti position. And what he did was that he would continue to pay for the notes to the Asantehene in order to ensure there would be peace. But before he realized, the Fante people at Cape Coast had taken over the notes. You know, the notes transferred from the Dutch to the English. For whatever reason, it fell into the hands of the Fantes. And the actual, you know, whenever you are trading with somebody or you lease your property to someone, you know, every year the value would appreciate. Okay. And so the cost of it would also be adjusted.
So these notes basically were testament to some kind of commercial agreement which required that some amount of money was paid.
Had to be paid to the Ashantis, like an indenture.
All right.
And every year or every period they reviewed it. You know, so original copies were in the hands of the Ashantis, but the review had fallen into the hands of the Fantes for no apparent reason, and they declined or refused to make the Asantehene know the actual fee that was supposed to be paid to them. And later on, when they learned that the money they received was not what they were supposed to obtain, they felt that the English and the Fantes had come together to deceive them. So Ashanti started sending soldiers down the coast, you know, to fight them.
Do we know what the numbers were in terms of like strength of their armies?
In fact, the Ashanti army initially sent was 20,000. Then under Edubofoɔ. Then later on, they had to send more. So it became 40,000.
That's a lot of people.
It was a lot of people. And we are told that crossing the River Pra alone at Asen Praso, it took 5 days.
Wow.
Yes, because
40,000 people.
Yeah, the boats were small.
Yes, indeed.
And the Ashantis were not used to water, you know, so they had to, I mean, when I say water, I mean rivers.
Big rivers,
so they had to take their time to be ferried. And that alone took 5 days. And the moment they got there, they started rampaging and burning down Asen villages.
What kind of arms did the Ashantis have at that time?
The usual arms that...
Guns?
The guns, the usual guns that, like what our people will call tiabofre. You know, you shoot and you have to break it into two and reload. Yeah, it's not like the modern ones we have today. So in those days, your numerical strength would determine whether you win a war or not. So they had state-of-the-art weapons, but you cannot say compare it to what we have today.
Indeed, of course. But this is a long time ago. 150 years ago.
So the Ashantis went there with a view to protecting their interests.
So they burned the cities, the towns in Asen.
Towns are in the Asen areas.
Heading towards Elmina.
And towards Elmina. And Cape Coast, in fact, because you cannot succeed in Elmina alone
without
and
passing
get
through
back.
Cape Coast,
Yeah, and then the governor was informed about the impending Ashanti invasion. And the governor would not listen because, according to the notes we have, records we have, every now and then the Fantes would report to the English government at Cape Coast that the Ashantis are coming. And then his investigations will prove that it was just wolf, crying
Why
wolf.
were they doing that?
Because they were always scared of the Ashantis. And also the Ashanti traders would tell them that once we get to Kumasi, the Asantehene will come in.
You will see.
You know, and they felt that it was something that would actually happen. Yeah, so always they would go and make that report until that day, I mean that period when indeed the Ashantis were seriously coming, and then the British people had not fully prepared for them.
When did contact between the British and the Ashantis happen? Where? In this particular war?
Oh, always it was at the Asen area. Yeah, Asen Yankumase or Fante Yankumase. That was where they would meet and do their palavers. And even when the Asantehene was made satisfied that they would pay them all the money they needed and they would allow them to trade at Elmina, the Asantehene wanted to recall the army to Kumasi. And then the Ashanti chiefs said no, they would not return until they had had the walls of the Cape Coast Castle in their hands, as war trophy.
But wasn't that disregarding the orders of their king?
No, it was like telling the king that, don't worry.
We'll win.
You will win, and then you will control the whole of this area again. And mind you, if Ashanti is able to defeat the British in Cape Coast, they will control the trade, less the Fanta middlemanship agency.
So to make goods, cost of goods cheaper, and they can make more profits
More
because there will be no middlemen.
Yes.
Okay.
And then slavery too
will
continue.
Okay.
So they enjoyed it. I mean, the Asantehene just succumbed to his people. So he appointed Anokye to lead them.
Okay.
And then the Anokye man too was somebody that the Ashanti, the problems they will have later was the fact that they found him as a drunkard, as a very lazy person, womanizing, and even the letters the governor wrote to be sent to the Asantehene to recall his troops so that the two will sit down and make peace. Anokye sees the letters.
He wanted to fight.
He wanted to fight.
Was he like a commander?
He was in fact, the commander, the general commander, the general officer commanding the Ashanti army, more or less the commander-in-chief of the Ashanti army, because the Ashantis, Bantamahene is always the commander-in-chief of the Ashanti army. It used to be Asafo, but because the Asafohene could not protect Obiri Yabua, and the Doma people killed him. When Okomfo Anokye landed on Ashanti soil, he demoted him and made him second to Bantama. So every Bantama Hene will be called the Kronti Hene, and then Asafohene will be the Akwemu Hene, second in command. So Anokye will be made the king, but will be made the commander. But the soldiers themselves wanted the Mampong Hene to have led them, because Mampong traditionally is also second to Kumasi. Less war. It was second to Kumasi. They didn't like Anokye, but because of the existing war formation, Anokye had it, and he became the head. And then the British too, on the spur of the moment, had to take a decision as to how to contain Ashanti, because the governor didn't know that his letters were not getting to the Asantehene. So he fell on the British Parliament for advice. And
then what did they advise?
The advice was the bringing down of their finest soldier at the time, Colonel Sir Garnet Wolseley. And before he also came in, he gave his terms to the British government. Around that time, West Africa was called the white man's grave, because they died in their thousands along the coast of West Africa. They did not know.
Because of malaria and other diseases.
And they didn't know it was the mosquito killing them. They thought that it was bad breath coming from rotten trees along the coast. They also drank from our waters freely. They didn't know that that was also causing them diarrhea and dysentery. So these two factors would always kill them. As a result, the British were never prepared to pump in many soldiers. They rather loved to bring in commanders here, and then they would train local people in order to fight. But for the first time, Sir Garnet Wolseley asked for the finest of the soldiers, numbering 2,000.
British soldiers.
British soldiers, white soldiers, British soldiers. And then on the Gold Coast, they had 600 trained soldiers. So he had 2,600.
Did he have any reinforcements from the Fantis?
The Fantis refused to join them. And their reason was that the Ashantis had already landed on their land. They had already arrived, fighting them at Anomabo, Mankasim, Elmina. And the protection was only at Cape Coast, almost all the Fante towns, the Ashantis had demolished their houses. And even in Cape Coast, we are told that because of the heavy rains that year, many buildings had fallen, and refugees from Asen and other Fanti areas were sleeping in the streets. So the the Fantis wanted the war to end as early as possible so that the Fantis would leave their land. For that reason,
So the Ashantis would leave their land?
Would leave their land. For that reason, they refused to contribute soldiers.
Okay.
But they had one, Captain Glover, who was sent to the eastern side of the country and brought in troops from Accra and then Akwapim and Achem,
okay,
to be of help to them. And then they also brought in troops from the West Indies. And then they brought in troops from the Hausala, northern Nigeria. And then Lagos, they brought in troops from Gambia and Sierra Leone.
This was a coalition.
A huge one.
Against Ashanti?
Against Ashanti, a very huge one, to ensure that the number would even double that of the Ashanti army. Okay. And then also, whilst the troops had arrived, they also made sure, that was towards the end of 1873, they made sure that more soldiers would arrive to surprise Ashanti. At that time, Ashanti had had a serious problem because led by the Ewes, the Ewes most of the time had been the map readers of the Ashanti people. Anytime they wanted to make incursions to the east under Dubofour. And it is said that they had lost over 20,000 soldiers in the east because they wanted to invade the Oyo Empire with the Ewe people in Nigeria. And Asantehene had to call Dubofour immediately to the coast when they learned that Sir Garnet Wolseley was arriving. And they also learned that one from their own entourage they had sent to Britain. They wanted the British to understand them because as part of the 1831 treaty they signed with the British, the Ashantis were to give up all the Twi-speaking tribes they were holding on to. The Wasa, Achem, Chifo, and then Asen, Denchira, and Elmina. And then the Ashantis felt, no, this was purely an African affair. So when we make a treaty with you, you do not say that we should give up on these states, because long before we came in, these people, we had conquered them under Osei Tutu, and they were serving us. So how do you think that you could thinkably receive them because they said they want to serve you? How do you say you have received them, so I should give up on them? And then second, you said that we should stop human sacrifice. The Ashantis wanted Queen Victoria herself to understand Ashanti tradition, and for that matter, the African form of religion, that whenever a great king died, for us, it was just a transition to the other world, and you needed slaves and servants to accompany you, to go and serve you. And so it was not a matter of the Asantehene always getting up to kill people, but that when an Asantehene or a famous chief died here, somebody had to be made to accompany the king. And for them, they didn't see it as murder. They found it as part of their rituals, which they felt Queen Victoria should be made to know. And then again, the people being killed were those who were already their war captives. So whether we kill them to accompany the king or not, being war captives, prisoners, I mean, we could dispose of them in any manner at all.
How did Asante justify the slave trade?
So that was the way in which they justified the slave trade, to the effect that when you have captives in war, you destroy them. And when you destroy them for no profit, it is better to sell them. The first advantage is that you make money. The second advantage is that it may be that you may not have a good place to keep them, and then they are going to starve. So you are saving their lives. And then if you don't want to save their lives and you don't want to keep them because of the high cost of it, you have to kill them. So they believe that slavery was a very good way of making profit and also saving human lives, and then helping the buyers to make use of them wherever they wanted to.
And of course, there were Europeans who would buy the human beings anyway.
When there is no ready market, how can there be market? Yeah. So always it was buy and sell.
Demand and supply.
Demand and supply. So if there is a ready demand, and then the supply will come through wars, then I will fight, and then get more people, supply, make money, and then the state becomes prosperous, and then the trade also booms.
So Ashanti had 40,000 troops on one side, and then the British coalition with people from various ethnic groups from abroad, Caribbean, Gambia, wherever, on this side. What were their numbers? Does history tell us how many numbers they had in the end?
They had about 40,000, about the same number. Okay, but the Ashanti advantage over them was the fact that the Ashantis knew the terrain more than all these people they had brought in. To the Ashantis to really knew war. You know, apart from the well-trained British officers, you will not be able to compare anybody they had brought with the Ashanti. So that's a slight advantage Ashanti had over them. But the British advantage Ashanti also had, they had over Ashanti was the fact that this was the first time the British decided to destroy Ashanti power once and for all in order to bring peace to the coast as a way of governing the entire country.
So they wanted to eliminate or just completely subdue Ashanti power.
And all their allies at all costs. So this was the first time they thought about it. So it was not a war that would end until the British had won. And this was something that Ashanti never knew, because at all times when the Ashantis fought, whether the British or any of the coastal people, even the Twi-speaking people, they ended the war when they had succeeded and then plundered the villages and would carry the booty to Kumasi.
Women, goods, things like that.
Yeah, jubilantly. Gold, whatever they would find, carry them to Kumasi and sell off the slaves. This was the first time the British taught themselves that Ashanti should not carry anything to Kumasi. Second, we are going to pursue the Ashantis into their own country. And then third, defeat them there the first time. And he had some lessons to learn from what we just discussed, the Nsamanko War, 1824, the Battle of Nsamanko. You see, Sir Charles McCarthy had the same plan, except that he made a mistake of going to the bush to meet the Ashanti army face to face. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was the fact that he felt Ashanti was just a savage, backward tribe that did not know the art of warfare. So with just a handful of people, you could just baffle them and then destroy them, which was a mistake. So Sir Garnet Wolseley decided first and foremost to do what Captain Sir Charles McCarthy had done by carrying the war to Ashanti, but not to fight them midway as McCarthy did, rather to fight them on Ashanti soil. And being the first time that Ashanti was fighting on its own soil, Sir Garnet Wolseley felt that psychologically, Ashanti would be defeated, seeing their own villages burnt down the first time.
So in this war, there was no fighting in the central region area.
The fight was what the Ashantis themselves had brought when they were coming down,
burning through Asin and all those towns.
And when the British saw it, immediately they brought in a heavy load of troops, as I said.
Yes, indeed.
And then fought the Ashantis and repelled them.
Okay, so push them back.
And pushing them back towards Kumasi. The main British army quickly took the main Cape Coast Kumasi road. That was the main road. And technically, his reason for doing that was that the main Ashanti army, which was almost about 40,000, would have to cut new roads. And that would weaken them and then delay them.
Exactly.
So with that, they were able to get to Ashanti first.
Oh, the British got to British troops got to Ashanti first.
Ashanti first.
Okay.
And then Ashanti also, realizing what could happen to them, you know, they were also warriors and they knew the art of war. So Amankwetia advised one chief, the Anantahini, called, I've forgotten the, Asamoah Nkwanta, very good. His name was Asamoah Nkwanta, to try and fight the British people, not directly attacking the main army face to face, but in a form of a guerrilla style.
Okay.
So as also to delay them on the way.
To get to Kumasi.
For them to enable the Ashantis
Okay.
get to Kumasi and also regroup properly.
All right.
And he did it with an expert efficiency.
So hit and run.
Yeah, he did
guerrilla
it so
tactics,
well that
yeah.
he was given a title, Okra Srafwo,
What does that mean?
like the one who could uplift the soul of the Ashanti.
Of Christ's soul.
Yeah, in fact, he did so well that at Fosu, you know, and won a battle against the British over there. But Sir Garnet Wolseley made sure the main army would not waste time over there. So he kept on
Advancing
moving,
towards Kumasi.
advancing towards Ashanti.
What were the levels of the casualties like in this war as they were trying to push towards Kumasi? A lot of people died?
It's a good question. Because when Ashanti arrived in Kumasi, the main Ashanti, metropolitan Ashanti, their army had reduced to 20,000 and 168 chiefs had died. You know, the chiefs were always like the junior commanders.
Yes.
So it means they had lost 168 commanders and 20,000 of their soldiers
Half of
had
their
died.
fighting strength had gone.
Yes, had gone. So that should tell you that, I mean, it was not an easy thing at all.
Did the British suffer casualties
They
too?
also suffered, if not more. But their advantage was that whilst Ashanti did not have replacement, because as we began by saying, they had lost heavily in the Volta region when they were invading Oyo.
And north side, every
yes,
side, yeah.
and between 1867 and 1874 was not long enough to have more men to grow up and then train them to come and fight. It was not easy for Ashanti at all. But in the case of the British, they kept on bringing in troops from Hausa land, from Lagos, from Sierra Leone, Gambia, and the Caribbean.
So always replenishing what was lost.
Yes, and that was why the army became bigger and bigger.
What happened when the British got to Kumasi?
When they did not immediately get to Kumasi, the Ashantis were able to hold them at Adanse because the Ashantis sent in a German mediator called Kune. So you will see that he will come from the Volta side, called Kune, to go and plead with the Sir Garnet Wolseley to return home, you know, and that he will respect the terms of the 1831 treaty. And we know the major terms of the 1831 treaty. He also assured him that he will make sure the trade routes would be open.
Well, just back it up a bit. What were the terms of the 1831 treaty?
First and foremost, human sacrifice, we have to stop. Second, all the Twi-speaking tribes serving Ashanti, no more to serve Ashanti. And then three, to give up on Elmina. And then open the trade route so that all of us would make use of it and then stay peacefully. And Ashanti had said no to everything. So this time, they had said they would respect everything. Then the British leader, Sir Garnet Wolseley, informed the Ashantis that they had arrested some Fanti Asen soldiers, thousands of them. They should quickly release them. And then some missionaries, Presbyterian missionaries. You see, anytime Ashantis found white people on their land, they suspected they were spies. So they had arrested and they didn't understand their mission, that they were just godly people. The Ashanti decided not to release them against the advice of the Queen Mother. The Ashanti Queen Mother said, please, let's release these people and make sure that these white people would not set foot on our land. The Ashanti said no. And the reason why he said no was not to disrespect the Queen Mother, but he said, at the time when I called them, They told me they would not come until they had the walls of the Cape Coast Castle in their hands. So if they are coming without the walls of the Cape Coast Castle, then I will also not receive them.
Exactly.
Until he heard that his people were dying in their numbers. And then I was making a case that the Ashanti themselves had sent a delegation to Queen Victoria. They stayed there for 6 months and they would not receive Queen Victoria because she sent a message to them that her representative on the Gold Coast was the governor. So she herself would respect the governor if she would bypass him and then deal with them. So they should go back and deal with the governor.
So why did they stay there for 6 months?
They stayed thinking that
eventually
the queen would change her mind. So when they arrived on the coast, they were the first to know that the British were preparing to attack Ashanti. So immediately they changed their, well, I won't say they changed their course, but I would say belatedly, they took the advice of both the governor and the queen to go and negotiate with the governor here that they should quickly recall Sir Garnet Wolseley. He accepted it on condition that they would immediately pay for all the expenses that had been incurred as a result of the war and also release every troops.
So was Kumasi occupied?
Kumasi would be occupied later because the Asantehene would not accept that, would not accept. And then the Asantehene would also send 2 of his sons, his own children, to the British, as like protege, to be kept, a form of pioneering in those days, to be kept by the British as proof that the Ashantis would respect their terms and organize money and then pay whatever they were supposed to pay. And then Sir Garnet Wolseley responded to them that if you had been able to send a delegation of 6 men to the UK, what shows that you can't pay this money? And the British also had learned that in order to send the delegation to the UK, every Ashanti man was taxed to pay 10 shillings. So if you know how to raise funds, what shows you cannot pay this? And then sending your 2 sons to us. Later, the Fantis explained to the British that where you have come, among us the Akans, we are matrilineal. You understand? We are matrilineal. So when the Asantehene sends you his own children, he's losing nothing. And then we are also, like we could marry so many women. You understand?
Yes.
So it could be that these children are even coming from
some woman that he doesn't really like. So he's got no love for them.
So just ignore them. And the British took that advice and then ignored whatever the Asantehene was doing. And so they will get to, before you enter Ashanti proper, the presence Adanse. So they cross the Pra and entered Adanse. Then the Adanse, Kwajo Obeng was a very powerful man. He encouraged, when all the Ashanti chiefs were scared, he encouraged them to rise up and fight in defense of their land. And he told them that he had a bountiful supply of arms and ammunition, which he would supply to them so that he will fight the British.
Did they listen to him?
They listened to him.
So they fought?
They fought. And immediately the Asantehene told him that they would do everything to make these 20,000 soldiers face head on with the British at a location which was ideal for the Ashantis near Bekwai called Amuafu. So he should be able to hold them immediately or at Dompase and Fomina. And he brought in Asamoah Kwanta, the one I have already mentioned, to assist. They did their best, except that the British troops were just pouring in day in and day out. So they pushed the Ashantis to Amuafu, and indeed, a serious battle was fought over there. Ashanti was defeated, and the British moved on
to Kumasi.
What
happened there?
They reached Kumasi, I think, in the evening, 5 p.m. of 4th February 1874. They got to Kumasi. And the general, Sir Garnet Wolseley, sent a message to the Asantehene that he needed to meet him to make a treaty with him. Surely the Asante would not go. I mean, he feared that they would capture him or ridicule him or something like that. So the Asante never went. He stayed for 2 days. The Asantes never came. Then the British also realized that for as long as you are in the heart of the enemy territory, you could be surprised. That was not a safe thing to do. So what he did was to set fire to the city of Kumasi and to burn down the palace.
Wow.
And we learned that they took a lot of gold. Gold the Ashantis they didn't need, because the Ashantis then had so much gold which they had hidden. So the little, even the little they found over there for the British writers was something that surprised them. They took everything.
Meanwhile, there was
away.
more. There was more.
The Ashantis felt it was nothing. So in the haste, they left all this there. They burnt down the palace. That was the first palace built for them by the famous King John Kwani of Nzimaland at Pampaso. So the present palace at Menchia would be a latter one. So they burnt it down.
So the site at Pampaso, does it still exist today?
That's where they still have stool houses there. In fact, that's where the golden stool is. They have their stool houses there. But that's originally Pampaso. You see that it's on a hill, overlooking the rest of Kumasi. And Menchia was only a flat land where the townspeople, when they beat gong gong, people would go and meet and listen to their chiefs. Or their Shia,
where the town meets.
Would meet.
Shia means to meet.
Very good.
Oman town.
So eventually that was where they built the modern palace. So they burned down this old palace, which was built in the form of a fort, because the man who built it for them, John Kwani of Nzimaland, he knew the technology from the Germans. So this fort palace was burnt down, and then they met the representatives of the Asante at Formina, where the Ashantis now acknowledge not just to respect the terms of the 1831 treaty, but this time to serve the British.
So they actually signed this treaty with Queen Victoria.
Queen Victoria to serve the
represented by Sir Garnet
Wolseley, on the ground, to serve the British, never to fight again. I mean, all the other terms included, and also to pay for the cost of the war.
I understand the indemnity was 50,000
ounces of gold.
Wow.
Yeah, which was a lot of money. Then in today's money, it would be a lot.
Basically taking money from Ashanti to pay for the cost of this war that was prosecuted.
Because they felt that the war was precipitated by the Ashanti people. And you know, in every war, the terms would become the victor's terms.
Exactly.
Yeah, so everything was imposed on Ashanti.
What was the state of affairs as far as human sacrifice was concerned? Was it part of the treaty as well?
Number one. So Ashanti was made to stop, and they agreed never to return to that again.
How about trade with the British? Was it now free trade?
Now there will be free trade with the British, which eventually would also benefit Ashanti, because as soon as Ashanti was defeated, the British now extended the Sekondi Takwa railway line to Kumasi. So now Ashantis also began to be sophisticated. And then the missionaries were allowed to do their work, set up churches and schools. So Ashantis started having education. And then because of the free trade and then the introduction of the cocoa economy, now Ashantis would also learn cocoa farming. And so it became useful for them. But there were other after effects of the war.
So this Sagrenti War, which took place 150 years ago, why is it significant to us in the 21st century?
Extremely significant. It's a very lovely question you are asking for our people to know. Extremely significant. The first significance of this is, you know, somebody who had entrusted some care, some faith in you. Now you meet another person in England and decide to do something behind him. And I mean the betrayal of Ashanti by the Dutch. You see, Elmina was Ashanti territory. Now the treaty to exchange the forts took place in England, including Elmina, in disregard of Ashanti interests. So the first thing for us as Africans and black people to learn is that no matter the differences existing between white people, Europeans, they were more interested in their interest more than their positions, common interest, more than their positions. At any time, they were ready to sacrifice their positions and then stick to interests that will be of a higher benefit to them. So that was the first one. The second one was that, as we began by saying, the British themselves had decided to take the whole of the Gold Coast. And if you take the whole of the Gold Coast, the southern tribes were of no consequence for them. Always it was Ashanti. So they had already planned at the Westminster to come and destroy Ashanti. So it's of significance to us that at all times, these people are thinking not once, twice, and 3 times about us, how to plunder us, and then take whatever we have, irrespective of whatever friendship they have with us. Another significance of the war was that in 1874, because it was their agenda to take over the whole country, by defeating Ashanti, immediately they extended it to the north, because the Ashanti allies, the Dagombes, and also their vassal states, the British took over all of them. Now turn to the east. The same Captain Glover, who had organized Akwapim, Ga, and Akim troops for Sir Garnet Wolseley, was sent to help the Akwapim and the Krobo people against the Ewes. And the Ewes also sent emissaries to Ashanti.
Because they were allies.
They were war allies all the time. And I believe you are learning a lot between Ashanti and the Ewes. They had always been war allies, So they sent emissaries to Ashanti to bring in more soldiers to help them. And Asante Hine sent 3 men to inform them about the defeat that had occurred to he himself.
Myself, I'm suffering.
Yes.
How can I send you men?
And then the treaty he had signed. So with that, the Ewe people quickly surrendered, and the famous Jelukope Treaty was signed between the British and the Anglo people, and it means that they came under the British. So Ashanti came under the British in February, and then the Ewes came under the British in June. And then in September, having succeeded to take over the whole country, the British now passed an act in their parliament separating the protectorate of the Gold Coast from Lagos and Sierra Leone and giving it a full colonial status. There will be ripples everywhere. The war reverberated everywhere. What was it? Initially, the Fanti people and the Gans, who had always been helping the British, had been treated as allies of the British. The moment Ashanti was defeated, they were no longer treated as allies, but as colonial people. So initially, when the British would plead with you for soldiers to help us fight Ashanti, this time there was conscription, forced taking of soldiers, and then they would also levy taxes on them in order to run the whole country.
So their friendship was a strategic one. They used these people to further their big aims.
So
after they conquered Ashanti, then they finally showed their true colors.
The true colors. So it was after 1874 that the Fantis also told the British that, no, we don't need you, we want you to go home.
Too late.
Yes, and then the British told them that, yes, it's too late. And mind you, we have already angered and wounded the Ashantis. So when we leave, Ashanti will overrun all of you. So the British and the Ashantis will have to sit down again. Thinking over it, they felt that the British were a necessary evil, in fact, a necessary evil to stay, because making them go away, the whole country will come back into the hands of the Ashanti people. And we will end by, we cannot end unless we talk about the scramble for Africa. Around that time, because of the Sagrenti War, many of the Akan states, hitherto serving Ashanti, had their freedom, like German, Bontuku, and I mean the entire Bono people, and then the Nzimes at Bassam, Asini, then up the Jula people, and then midway the Bawule and the Anyin people, who were all Ashantis, and in fact part of the Ashanti kingdom, they seceded from it. And the French immediately took advantage of that.
And that's Ivory Coast.
That Ivory Coast. That was why we all say that before 1874, Ashanti controlled an area almost 3 times the size of present-day Ghana, because Togo, Benin automatically was part of it, and they were even going to take the entire Oyo with their were allies. Then upwards, because of the Mosi people, who are the natural brothers of the Dagomba and the Mamprusi, no, Ashanti had influence over there. And then the western side, as I said, the Bono people there. So to this day, the capital of Bono is left in Ivory Coast. Bono Manso is in Ivory Coast, and many Akan states being there. That's
the capital of Bono is in Ivory Coast.
In Ivory Coast. That's why when we are playing football with them, you hear them having many Akan names.
Exactly.
Even their first president, Hofua Boigny, it is Ofe Boahin. Ofe Boahin, and then Laurent Poku, Lawrence Poku. Yes. So that was it, and that was how the effect of the war. In fact, if the Ashanti had not been defeated by the British, the size of present-day Ghana would have been almost 3 times this one. And then, if Ashanti too had not been defeated, the other side of the coin is that nobody could predict what would have happened to the southern states without English protection. That one nobody could tell.
And so now you know the significance of the Sagrenti War, which took place 150 years ago in 1874, and the ripples that reverberated not only throughout the Gold Coast and present-day Ghana, but all around the world. Mr. Anokye Frimpong, as always, it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for this deep dive into history. There's a lot more that we can learn from the history of Ghana and the Santi people. And in the next video, you'll get to know a little bit more. What has fascinated you most about this particular telling of history concerning the Sagrenti War? Put your comments down below and let's have a conversation. But for now, hope you've enjoyed, hope you've learned a lot, and we'll see you in the next video. God bless.